There's something about World War I that keeps pulling us back. Not the battles, not the politics, but the raw, unfiltered survival ingenuity that people had to rely on just to stay alive. When nations were cut off, when supply lines snapped, when farmland turned into trenches, ordinary farmers and civilians were forced to adapt with ruthless efficiency. And those adaptations weren't temporary tricks. Many of them quietly shaped modern agriculture. So, before we dig into the 8 exposed World War I food production hacks that every modern farmer should know, let's take a minute to set the stage, because it matters. The world was running on outdated farming methods when the Great War hit. Suddenly, millions were fighting at the front, leaving fields abandoned. Global trade collapsed. Fertilizer availability plummeted. Insects, disease and weather did not care that a war was happening. Farmers had to produce more with less, with fewer hands, fewer animals and fewer resources. What came out of that pressure cooker was a set of techniques that still hold value today, methods we can study, borrow from and apply in modern homesteads, farms and survival setups. And if you're the kind of person who follows Warfield Chronicles, then you already know that history is one of the most reliable survival instructors you'll ever meet. Now let's get into the heart of it. Hack 1 is that World War I farmers learned how to turn low-quality land into productive soil using trench compost systems. When chemical fertilizers were redirected to ammunition factories, farmers had no choice but to build fertility from whatever organic matter they could find. They dug long trenches, layered manure, straw, food scraps, and even shredded paper, and then buried it in sections, letting natural heat and pressure jump-start decomposition. Modern farmers can use this same technique by digging shallow rows in depleted soil, packing them with organic waste, covering them with a thin layer of earth and letting them break down over a season. This is a viable method for anyone restoring poor soil, especially in dry regions where surface compost would dry out too fast. Hack 2 is the wartime method of staggering crop cycles to avoid catastrophic losses. Farmers recognized that relying on a single planting window put them at risk. If bad weather hit or pests attacked, an entire year of food could disappear. The solution was to plant the same crop in multiple waves, weeks apart, reducing the chance of total failure. Today, small-scale farmers can do this with vegetables, grains, and even fodder crops. For example, planting maize or beans in 3 phases 2 weeks apart ensures that even if one cycle fails due to drought, 2 others still have a chance. This isn't theory. It was the difference between hunger and survival during the war. Hack 3 comes from the rise of war gardens, where civilian growers mastered the art of microspacing. With limited land available, gardeners learned that spacing crops slightly closer while maintaining soil nutrients produced surprisingly high yields. They used deep tilling and organic feeding to support these dense plantings. A modern adaptation is to double-dig garden beds and enrich them heavily before planting. If you've got limited land, maybe a backyard plot or a small homestead, using richer soil and tighter spacing can double your output the same way it did for wartime families. Hack 4 exposes how World War I institutions use crop rotation as a weapon against famine. Instead of planting the same fields with wheat year after year, they rotated with legumes like peas and vetch that restored nitrogen naturally. This wasn't innovation. It was rediscovery under pressure. Today, any farmer with soil exhaustion problems can use a simple 2-year cycle. Plant a nutrient-hungry crop 1 year, then follow it with legumes. This alone can cut down fertilizer costs dramatically. Hack 5 is the strategic use of drought-proof staple crops. Wheat shortages pushed World War I farmers to turn to hardy alternatives like barley, oats and rye. These crops could survive rough weather and still deliver calories. If modern farmers want true resilience, they can dedicate part of their land to one reliable fallback crop. In Kenya, for example, that might be sorghum. In colder regions, rye still performs when others fail. The principle is simple. Always have a guaranteed producer, even in a bad season. Hack 6 takes us into seed control, because, World War I farmers learned quickly that imported seed just couldn't be trusted. Shipping disruptions meant that entire villages saved and exchanged premium seed lines suited to their region. They selected for the healthiest plants each season and built their own resilient seed stock. Modern farmers can do this today by saving seeds from the strongest plants, storing them in airtight containers, and developing locally adapted varieties that outperform imported alternatives. Hack 7 reveals how World War I growers mastered livestock-integrated farming despite shortages. Animals weren't just for meat, they were engines for manure, land clearing and grass control. Even a single goat or a pair of chickens offered fertilizer and pest management at almost no cost. For a modern homestead, adding chickens to a garden cycle can provide nitrogen-rich manure, slug control and eggs all at once. World War I farmers understood synergy long before it became a buzzword. Hack 8 is the wartime emphasis on food preservation as part of production, not separate from it. Farmers could grow all they wanted, but if they couldn't store it safely, it didn't matter. Techniques like root cellaring, ash packing potatoes and water glass preserving eggs allowed households to stretch their food through winter and transport shortages. Today, anyone can apply this by pairing their harvest with a storage method. You grow it, you preserve it, and you create reserves exactly the way people did when supply chains were collapsing. These 8 exposed World War I food production hacks prove one thing. Crisis breeds innovation that stands the test of time. If you learned something new, or you want more deep-dive historical analysis from a survivalist angle, make sure you subscribe to Warfield Chronicles, share this video with fellow history lovers, and keep the conversation alive.